Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story that I read because it is Short Story Tuesday, and today's short story is all about a failed relationship and someone reflecting in an unusual setting. I am referring to Amour by Nicole Krauss, which was published in 2020 in her short story collection, To Be a Man. For those who don't know, Nicole Krauss is a Jewish-American author. I feel that's significant because that comes up a lot in her writings, apparently, especially in this book, as many of the characters are Jewish, and Nicole finds the time to tell us they are Jewish. She's written a number of books and short stories over these past 20 or so years. She's been writing for 2 decades based on what I found about her. And she's won a number of awards for her work. Some people have called her a postmodern author, which I can see a little bit of that. And she commonly writes about women and the Jewish identity and uses strange settings in her work, which you see a little bit of in the short story collection, especially in the short story that I'm going to be talking about today. I didn't know about this author before I had found her short story collection at the local library, so be sure to patronize your local libraries. But I would be very happy finding more from her in the future, especially if it has similar writing and just like a very unique kind of structure to the stories. So without further ado, let's talk about Amour. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Amour focuses on an unknown narrator as they are recalling a friend named Sophie that they've known periodically through their lives while they're living in a refugee camp in a desolate wasteland for some unknown reason. It's not really specified, but that's used as the backdrop for the story, getting at what I was talking about a few moments ago. But she talks about Sophie and her relationship with a young man named Ezra. They have a pretty firm relationship at first, set against the backdrop of the new millennium in the year 2000, and it goes for a little bit before they have a bit of a sad breakup, but life goes on as the narrator notes. But they do get back together a short while later, realizing that they love each other and they love to touch each other, which is nice for them. And they end up getting back together, and they realize they have a lot of similarities too. They're both Jewish. They both want the same things out of life, and so they decide to get engaged. You also see flashes to the present in the dying refugee camp, noting how Sophie has changed greatly and how she's telling this story, like recalling all of this while people seem to be suffering around her. And nobody seems to be having a good time. The narrator in particular is just trying to live in this refugee camp, but is also interested in hearing Sophie's story for some unclear reason at first. But the narrator eventually catches up with Sophie again, and they talk about how Sophie was walking with a friend one day, and she was really cold, and her friend offered her the coat. And she realized that Ezra had never really done that for her, just because, not because he didn't care, but because it seemed like he was only capable of a certain amount of love, and it didn't extend to offering a coat or helping her when she was injured. And then she saw a French film one day with another friend where she realized that there was a love in that movie that she didn't have for Ezra, and she thought about her parents and her grandparents and decided that there wasn't something there that she wanted to move forward with Ezra with, and she had changed and since they initially met, and she ends the engagement with Ezra and proceeds on with her life. And as the story ends, like Sophie gestures and is like, all of this, like she's gesturing to the world, and the narrator thinks that she might be referring to the absurdity of the start and stop points in relationships, or the absurdity of how tomorrow isn't really promised, especially in this refugee camp, or the absurdity that anyone gets to live or die with any sense of rationality. A bit bleak there, but that's where the story ends. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit worth talking about with Amour. One of the things that Nicole Krauss seems to be talking about here is changing relationship goals. That seems to be the central idea of Sophie and Ezra's relationship, because Sophie and Ezra are exactly what they each other wants at first in the relationship. Like they're happy together. They realize they have a lot of similarities, and they have that Jewish background, and maybe their parents want them to end up with Jewish individuals. So so this is exactly what their relationship needs to be, and they don't really question it any further, and they're happy together. It's very nice, but they do continue to break up, and continue to have questions in their relationship, and these questions and these breakups have to mean something, because if you love someone, you're not just gonna break up with them for no real reason. There has to be something there, something lying in the background. And I think Sophie realizes it once her friend offers her the coat. Once she's sort of dragged into this moment where she realizes that Ezra can't quite give her what she wants. There's an interesting quote that I'd like to read to you. "It wasn't that he didn't love her," she said. "She always knew that he loved her, insofar as he was capable. He was just busy. He was absorbed. He had no instinct for how to take care of someone else, which has to begin with noticing, with listening. But in that moment that her friend understood that she was cold and paused what he was saying to offer his own coat, she felt the pain of what she'd been missing," which is a very fascinating quote from this, kind of getting at how, she doesn't realize that there's something missing in the relationship with Ezra. Like, there's something feels off and she's not ready to commit to marriage. And then running into this friend and going to see the French film, it realizes that she wants something, and she's grown in this relationship, and she wants something that Ezra can't really provide. He's not a bad person. He's just he just maybe hasn't grown in the same way that she has, or he probably wants something else in a relationship and doesn't feel the love that Sophie feels for Ezra. And so Krauss is really saying here that some people grow in relationships, others don't. What was once perfect for at one point in your life may not be perfect at another point, which it doesn't really feel that grand, but I like how she gets at it and how she says it. Krauss is also talking about absurdity of all things here. Did not expect to find that kind of theme in this story, but all this relationship drama is set against the backdrop of what is apparently a dying world. I was wondering what she could be referring to. This was written in 2020, so you could argue that maybe Krauss has a bleak outlook of what humanity looks like, but at the same time, Krauss is Jewish, and the Jewish people have a history with the Holocaust, so this could be set against a future Holocaust, or just the idea of the Holocaust, which I think is interesting. But what matters is that this relationship drama, this what seems so significant, is contrasted against something that seems much larger, much grander. And it seems like, why would any of this matter? Why does the narrator care that this is happening? And at the end of the story, Sophie calls attention to just that. She gestures, when she's thinking about the relationship, to all of this. And the narrator wonders, oh, well, maybe she's referring to the fact that, everything is kind of irrational, with moments of tiny bits of clarity, and that can especially apply to a relationship. Love doesn't seem rational at all, but we do have those moments where we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I think for sure that I do love this person, or that I don't like this person. I would like to be with someone else, and that makes sense. But you could also argue that Krauss is drawing a comparison to this world, and ultimately this small relationship might not mean that much in the grand scheme of things, especially with all the other suffering in the world. But it does matter to Sophie. To Sophie, this is her life. This is all that matters. And sure, there might be some grand things happening in the background, but, Sophie can't control all of that. So it's very interesting how Krauss frames this story, and I would argue in some cases maybe it kind of hinders or distracts from the message, but at other points it really sets the story apart, and it's going to make it more memorable. So I think I'm kind of mixed there, but I'm ultimately siding on it. And then the other interesting element of this story is the narrator's perspective. Specifically, the narrator is focusing on another person in this story, sort of talking about their own experience of having known Sophie and seen what she's seen through Sophie after she meets with her in the camp. Maybe kind of trying to distract themselves from all the horror that's going on, because it does seem to be attracting other people as well, especially with the past, the beautiful past that Sophie seems to be describing. But why is the narrator so focused on Sophie? Is it going back to that absurdity, kind of reflecting the weird nature of the world, given that it's a wreck at this point? Or maybe again it's just helping to distract that you need that absurdity to help you thrive, or something like that. And if this was in like a solitary sort of thing in this short story collection, that might be one thing, but it seems like every single story in this collection, it focuses on like another character through the eyes of a narrator. Particularly one story focuses on a narrator with a friend who is a bit of a rebel youth, or a troubled youth. And then another story about characters seeing their neighbor who visits their dead father's house pretty frequently, and it's a bit unusual there. But I think Krauss likes to examine people through the eyes of other people, because our stories are one thing, but you can understand a lot by seeing how other people observe it, like from an outsider's perspective, rather than being there, because we kind of lie to ourselves at times. Maybe, I don't know. I think there's a lot worth exploring in that regard, and I do hope I encounter future stories from her to see if it's just limited to this, or that's maybe kind of how she tells her stories. But either way, it makes for an interesting one with this particular short story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Amour by Nicole Krauss. A pretty wonderful short story, one that I think I'm going to be thinking about for a little bit, especially with the other short stories in this collection. I do recommend that you go out there and read it. I think Nicole has published some of these short stories in various magazines or news outlets or whatnot, so you might be able to find them there, but I would suggest you maybe go out and buy this or check it out from your local library, as it's a very fun and interesting read that I think might challenge you or something like that. If you have any thoughts on this, or you simply want to comment on what I said in my review, do so below. Let's have a discussion there. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that you can find out about Nicole, or other people can find out about the short story collection if they don't already know. And I wish you the best of luck until then in your weird and refugee camp featured dystopia travels. Farewell.